The electronic checklists contain all the checklists found in the operations manual. This includes the normal checklists and the non-normal checklists. The checklist can be displayed on any of the 3 MFDs. Either cursor control device is used to operate the checklist. The normal checklists are presented sequentially. Use the checklist display switch on the DSP to display the first checklist in sequence. The checklist title appears at the top. The current line item box is surrounding the first incomplete step in the checklist. When the cursor is placed next to or on a checklist step, a cursor selection box appears around that step. All incomplete steps are shown in white text. Notice the last 3 steps are green and have a green check mark in front of them. These steps are complete. The electronic checklist is able to sense that the auto brake selector, parking brake, and fuel control switches are set to their proper positions. When a step can be sensed by the checklist system, it is called a closed-loop step. When closed-loop steps are sensed complete, they are automatically checked off. Steps that are not sensed are called open-loop steps and appear with a gray box next to them. The flight crew must confirm that each step with a gray box is complete before manually checking it off. Let's say you have performed the first 3 steps on the checklist and you wish to check them off. When a checklist is initially displayed, the current line item box surrounds the first incomplete step in the checklist. Use the cursor select switch to check off this step. A green check mark and green text mark this step complete. Notice the next incomplete step is highlighted automatically. Check off the next 2 steps. Continue. Each step on the checklist is now checked off. When the checklist has been completed, the checklist complete indication appears at the bottom. Remove the checklist from the display. Once a normal checklist is complete, the next incomplete checklist in sequence is ready to be displayed. Display the next checklist. The next normal checklist in sequence is now displayed with the cursor highlighting the first step. Next, we'll discuss non-normal checklists. Non-normal checklists take priority over normal checklists when the checklist display switch is pushed. A problem in the hydraulic system exists and its associated ICAS message displays. Pushing the checklist display switch displays the non-normal checklist linked to this message. Only messages with icons have checklists associated with them. Display the hydraulic pressure primary left checklist. The title of the checklist appears in the same color as the ICAS message. Push the left primary pump switch off. The closed loop step is automatically checked off and the checklist is complete. The text that describes the non-normal condition remains white. Since this text is not a selectable step and is not evaluated, it does not change color. When the checklist has been completed, the icon is removed from the ICAS message. Remove the checklist. Cancel the ICAS message. ICAS messages may be displayed during pre-flight. Icons for amber-colored messages are inhibited until after the first engine is started. This allows the display of normal checklists during pre-flight instead of non-normal checklists. However, warning messages, which are red, always appear with an icon, regardless of phase of flight. Some non-normal procedures require immediate action, where recall items are completed before a checklist is displayed. The recall item for this checklist has been performed, and the fire is extinguished. Some checklists are latched to their ICAS message. If the condition no longer exists and the message is removed, the checklist can still be displayed. Display the Fire APU checklist. The Fire APU checklist now displays because it was latched. The checklist title is white because the fire is extinguished and the ICAS message Fire APU is no longer displayed. Complete the checklist. The checklist is complete and there are no additional checklists to view. Remove the checklist. The recall items for this checklist have been performed. Now, display the Fire Engine Right checklist. Continued is displayed when there are more steps on another page. The page indicators show that this checklist has 3 pages. The Page 1 key is white, indicating Page 1 is displayed. Since all of the steps on this page are complete, the 1 has turned green. The cursor positions itself over the Page 2 key. Display Page 2. The next item is a conditional statement. Conditional statements usually begin with the word if. The checklist step or steps indented below are only performed if the condition above it is true. Since the Fire Engine Right message remains displayed on ICAS, the conditional statement is true and therefore is green. Since this conditional statement depends on a time delay, this checklist step includes a countdown timer. The countdown timer starts automatically and continues to run even if you leave the checklist and come back to it later. As long as the timer is running, the current line item box remains on the step that triggered the timer. Since this is a closed-loop conditional statement, the checklist system can sense whether it is true or false. When the Fire Engine Right message is removed, the statement becomes false and turns cyan. When the timer reaches 0, it turns amber. The cursor then positions itself over the next incomplete step in the checklist. This step has no timer associated with it. Complete the checklist. Remember, steps with gray boxes must be manually checked off. Check off this step. The cursor highlights the Page 3 key. Display Page 3. The last page of this checklist contains a note. Notes are not selectable and therefore always remain white. Notes are discussed in detail in the next lesson. Now that all pages of the checklist have been viewed and the checklist complete indication appears at the bottom, the checklist is complete. Remove the checklist. Now let's look at 2 of the keys on the bottom of the checklist. The normal and non-normal keys are similar to the checklist display switch. The normal key displays the next unfinished normal checklist in the sequence. The non-normal key is displayed when there are non-normal checklists that need to be accomplished. It is used to display the checklist queue or the last remaining checklist in the queue. If the key is amber, it indicates that you have displayed a non-normal checklist earlier but have not completed it. Here is an example of multiple non-normal checklists. Push the checklist display switch. A checklist queue appears, allowing you to select which checklist to perform next. The queue is presented in the same order as the ICAS messages. The cursor automatically positions itself on the first checklist in the queue, but you may highlight any checklist using the touchpad. Display the Fire APU checklist. Notice the non-normal key is displayed because there are other non-normal checklists in the queue. The fire is extinguished. Complete this checklist. Once the checklist is complete, the cursor automatically positions itself on the non-normal key. Display the remaining non-normal checklists. The non-normal checklist queue updates to reflect the remaining non-normal checklists. If an additional message with an icon appears on ICAS, the queue does not update until it is displayed again. The checklist queue can be updated by reselecting it through the non-normal key. Highlight the non-normal key by touching the lower right corner area of the touchpad. Select the non-normal key. The queue is now updated. This concludes the instruction section of this lesson. You have finished the pre-flight procedures. Display and complete the pre-flight checklist. The pre-flight checklist is complete. Remove the checklist from the display. You are ready to start the engines. Display the before start checklist. Display the Fire APU checklist. Complete the checklist. Return to the non-normal checklist queue. The menu keys are used to display any checklist in the database at any time. The cursor is moved by sliding a finger across the touchpad. Move the hand to highlight the normal menu key. Touch and drag the hand so that the normal menu key display the normal menu. The normal menu page displays a list of the normal checklists. These are the same normal checklists that are in the operations manual. The non-normal checklists can also be accessed from a menu key. The fastest way to move the cursor to the menu keys is to use the corner areas of the touchpad. Highlight the non-normal menu key by touching the upper right corner area of the touchpad. Display the non-normal menu. This menu page displays a list of non-normal checklists organized by subject area, just like the operations manual. Any checklist can be displayed by selecting it in the menu. For now, remove the checklist using the checklist display switch. Some non-normal conditions do not have an ICAS message associated with them, but do have a checklist. These checklists are called unenunciated checklists. An example of an unenunciated checklist is the window arcing crack checklist. Display the checklist. Since there is no ICAS message, the unenunciated non-normal checklist must be manually selected from the non-normal menu. Touch the highlighted area. Display the unenunciated checklists. Highlight the window arcing crack left checklist. Since you are manually selecting this checklist, be sure you have highlighted the correct one, then display the checklist. The correct checklist is displayed. Perform the next step. Before you put this checklist away, let's discuss inhibited checklists. When you turned off the window heat, it generated the window heat left forward message. This consequential message has a checklist associated with it, but the checklist does not apply to this situation. Since the checklist does not apply, it has been inhibited. An inhibited checklist is not placed in the queue, and its icon is not displayed. Now remove the checklist from the display. Cancel the ICAS message. After completing the window arcing crack checklist, you decide to discontinue the flight, jettison fuel, and return for landing. The unenunciated checklists menu also contains the fuel jettison checklist. Highlight the fuel jettison checklist. Verify that you have highlighted the proper checklist, then display your selection. Check off the first step. This is an open-loop conditional statement. Yes or no must be selected before continuing with the checklist. For this example, select Yes. Continue. If Yes is marked, then the cursor selects the step under the conditional statement. Your selection of Yes or No can be changed at any time. Change your selection to No. Continue. If No is selected, then the step under the conditional statement turns cyan and is not selectable. Continue. Now, let's leave this checklist and come back to it when fuel jettisoning is complete. Fuel jettisoning is now complete, and you are ready to finish the fuel jettison checklist. Remember, non-normal checklists take priority over normal checklists when the checklist display switch is pushed. Although fuel jettisoning has no ICAS message, it is still displayed first because it is a non-normal checklist that was not completed. Display the checklist. The fuel jettison checklist displays, and the cursor highlights the step where you left off. Next, we'll look at operational notes. Examples of notes include operational limitations and inoperative equipment lists. When you have displayed a checklist that includes operational notes, the notes are collected and stored. The Notes key appears when notes exist. It can be selected at any time during the flight to access the stored notes. Display the notes. The Notes display allows you to review all of the operational notes collected during the flight. Each note includes a reference title of the checklist that generated the note. Now, let's discuss deferred items. Several non-normal checklists contain deferred items at the end of the checklist. Deferred items are steps that are attached to a normal checklist, such as the approach or landing checklist later in the flight. In this example, deferred items from the flap slat control checklist have been attached to the approach checklist. This non-normal checklist is considered complete when all the steps prior to the deferred items have been accomplished. The checklist complete indication reminds you that some steps are deferred to a normal checklist to be accomplished later. You could decide to accomplish the deferred items now, instead of doing them in the approach checklist. Let's look at a second example where the approach checklist was completed before the non-normal checklist was accessed. The deferred items cannot be attached to a normal checklist which is already complete. Therefore, the non-normal checklist is not considered complete until the deferred items are checked off. Now let's discuss resetting the checklists. To use a completed checklist again, it must be reset. Individual checklists can be reset manually by using the checklist reset key. Reset the checklist. The checklist is now reset and ready to use again. To reset all of the checklists for the next flight, use the Resets key. Select the Resets key. The Resets menu contains information related to the electronic checklist database. These keys allow you to reset multiple checklists at one time. The Reset All key resets both the normal and non-normal checklists. During pre-flight, it is important that all of the checklists start out reset and ready to use. Reset all checklists. All checklists are now reset. Some checklists are also reset automatically. A reset of selected normal checklists is accomplished automatically after a go-around. Another automatic reset occurs when you reselect a normal checklist through the Normal menu key. Let's say that you have completed the pre-flight checklist, but you wish to accomplish the checklist again. Display the Normal menu. Reselect the pre-flight checklist. The pre-flight checklist is now reset. Notice that the closed loop items still sense if a step is complete. Non-normal checklists are automatically reset when the checklists are completed and the non-normal condition no longer exists. If the condition occurs again, the checklist is reset and ready to be redisplayed. If you do not want to accomplish the current step or the entire checklist, it can be overridden. When you override a step or checklist, the electronic checklist system treats it as completed. Checklist steps and entire checklists can be overridden by using the Item Override key and Checklist Override key. For example, let's say that you are dispatching with the auto brakes inoperative. Override the auto brake selector step. The step turns cyan. The cyan color indicates that you have chosen not to perform this step. Both closed loop and open loop steps can be overridden. The electronic checklist treats overridden steps as complete. A checklist is considered complete if all selectable steps are either green or cyan. Now let's look at another override situation. You have selected the Flap Slat Control checklist from the non-normal menu for review. Page 2 of the checklist is shown here. Notice that there is no ICAS message and the title of the checklist is white. The Flap Slat Control has not failed on the airplane. You are only displaying the checklist for review. This checklist contains notes and deferred items. The notes are collected on the Notes page, and the deferred items have been attached to the Approach checklist. Since you are just reviewing the checklist, you do not want unnecessary notes and deferred items to remain in the system. To put away the checklist, you must override it so that the notes and deferred items are removed. Override this checklist. The notes and deferred items have been removed. Remove the checklist from the display. This completes the instruction section of this lesson. Shortly after takeoff, you decide to return for a landing. Display the Fuel Jettison checklist. Use the touchpad to highlight the non-normal menu. The pre-flight checklist was completed earlier. The captain wishes to accomplish the checklist again. Display the pre-flight checklist. Use the touchpad to display the normal menu. Override this checklist.